What is the future of the chevron? Are you the last American chevron, like old school?
As far as somebody who's just like devoted themselves, and at a level I devoted myself to the chevron and its analogs. I mean, when you get past the jazz beads, are still chevrons in their core, most of them.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. It's going to take somebody with a lot of madness in their heart to.
Wait, I forgot.
Like I said, I don't do anything anybody else couldn't do, but
Hi, guys. Welcome back to Meet the Bead. I'm your host, Sammy Alley. Today, we're going to be watching part 2 of Art Seymour's podcast interview. So, in this episode, you're going to hear a lot about the film that was made about him. The movie is called Film on Glass Beads USA. It is on YouTube for free. It was filmed 20 years ago by a researcher, and she went to his studio and spent a couple days and watched him in the hot shop and created an amazing video about his process, which is part of the reason we didn't talk a lot about it on the podcast, even though it's super interesting how he is able to make the chevrons. So the work that he did in that movie and the connections that he made led him to meet a gentleman named Cedi in Ghana, who is a well-known Ghanaian bead maker. And so you'll hear today a lot about his relationship with Cedi, some amazing beads he made for Cedi, and just the adventures that he went on following that video. And then we'll do some Meet the Beads, and he'll tell you all about his favorite beads. We'll do the Bead Jar segment, and then we'll do a little bit of a lightning round. So anyways, hope you enjoy. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, that's my favorite one so far. I mean,
that is serious. That is a serious beat there. That is.
what is this one called? The jazz bead with spectrum colors. Do you ever name your beads? Do you ever, I mean, other than the line of beads, do you ever like give a bead a name?
You know, the only one that really got a name was the one that Jeff called the master bead. Well, I name them. They give themselves names. I mean, some of them are explanatory. Like, you know, when I got involved with the Ghana thing, which, you know, as far as that, what bead put me on an adventure, and clearly the chevron bead, you know, put me on a almost 50-year adventure, which I'm still kind of on. I mean, it took me to Rendezvous for 30 years. It took me to Ghana. Um, but I made these Ghana flag beads. Yeah. So the Ghana flag is red, yellow, and green stripes with a black star, and the
Wow.
point of the black star points up to the red, and that's all symbolic. If you talk to Ghanaians, they'll tell you that it's their blood of them getting their, you know, the green of growing in Ghana, and their blood of them achieving their independence and all of that. Well, when I met this Ghanaian bead maker, Cedi, through this lady who was responsible for that film that's on the internet. That film was produced strictly as an in-house film for use at the university there at Northwestern. And she came to me at Friendship and talked to me about, you know, wanting to do a film in my studio. And she told me about her life and what got her into beads. She was a PhD anthropologist. She was a associate professor up there at Northwestern. And she said that she had worked in Uganda for her field work in the summers for 8 or 9 years. And her work there involved AIDS and teaching the local people about safe practices to not spread AIDS and to get AIDS, and that it was very frustrating work. Her husband, He was also a professor at Northwestern. He spoke fluent Swahili. Now, she tells me all this, and she said the work was so intense and frustrating. As an example, she said some of the languages of the people we're dealing with, they don't have a word for a term or a concept of risk.
Interesting.
Now we think about risk, life is full of risks. Everything you do, you risk your life when you go walk across the street, to the supermarket, whatever. But they say, well, if I walk in front of a hungry lion, he's going to eat me. But they don't have a concept of long-term risk. Like if I have behavior today that it could come back and bite me in the butt, 15 years from now and kill me. And trying to breach that philosophical level with the language thing was very frustrating for her. So after 8 years, she decided to not go to Uganda one year, and she went to Ghana, which is a largely English-speaking country. It was an English colony for years, and she wound up in Odomase, and she met the bead makers there, and she met this one bead maker, Mr. Cedi, who's just a very charming young man. This is Philippe's book on Cedi, and there's a picture of Cedi here. Might be able. Can you see that picture there?
Yes, I can see it. And
That's the author of this book, and that's Mr. Cedi there, who's the African gentleman. Now he makes powder glass beads in the Ghanaian tradition. One of many, many bead makers there. Well, she told me about meeting him, and she just got immersed in the bead culture. And she'd been to Africa, and I guess there's not much bead culture in Uganda. And she was like totally jacked up about beads. And she learned about chevrons, and she'd made these home films that she used in her teaching as a teaching aid. And she wanted to make a film about chevrons that covered all of it, from the making of the chevron to the getting them to Africa and how they're used culturally in Africa. And that's what brought her to me. And she told me about Mr. Cedi, and she said, oh, he's just a really charming man. And we talked for several hours, and she came back the following year and interviewed me again in front of a camera. She was talking to me about Cedi again, and I gave her one of my my millennium beads, the ones I call Zambedes. And I said, well, you're going back to Africa. I says, give him this bead with my compliments, So I sent him well, when I saw her the following year, she was all like, Mr. Cedi wants to know how you signed that bead. Well, it's signed in the cane. It's part of the glass. So that's what started the adventure, that I brought Cedi to my studio for a workshop. He travels extensively, comes to the U.S., goes to Europe. So he comes to America typically in the summer to an ethnographic show in Santa Fe. And so I arranged to have him come from Santa Fe up here, and we did a 4-day workshop with him in my studio. And I talked him through a workshop, and I pulled a signature cane for him.
I saw that. It's so amazing. That was so special of you to do.
Well, it was funny because I snuck it up on him. He didn't know what I was making, and I pulled it different than the other canes I make because it was pulled real small to be signature cane. And when we got it all done, I quick put it in the annealer, and the butt end of the cane was still on the pipe. And I walked over and I showed him the butt end of the cane where he could see it, and there it was, a C wrapped around a D. And he saw that, and he got a big old grin. And then I I gave him a second workshop, and
that's
that,
amazing how you were able to do that.
yeah, it
So,
came out very nice. It really did.
and then I want to also
It
show
was the
that
second
Sam,
try, but
also
but
show that. Oh
we
gosh.
ultimately we went to Ghana. I developed a method to make powder glass chevrons because the chevron is, to me, I'm nuts for glass. I'm just like a kid at Christmas. I mean, it doesn't matter. 24/7, the year round, 365, I'm nuts for glass. And I just assume other people are too. Well, not so much maybe with other people. And it was a painful lesson to find out it was that way, even with like Cedi, who makes a living making beads. We spent almost a month there, a long 3 weeks.
Wow. That's awesome.
And I developed this method to make a powder glass chevron. This is a chevron bead
That's one that you made.
that I made, and this is made with powder glass. This was not made with liquid glass,
Wow.
dipped out of a furnace. And I spent a year developing a technique to make this type of bead. And I had a lot of failures, it was kind of like Thomas Edison had a lot of failures making the light bulb. I didn't have as many failures as he did, but it took me a while to work up a system. And I worked up a system, and I called it the corn dog system because I I would dip this wooden stick in water, and then sprinkle powdered glass on it, and then mist it with water and sprinkle more powdered glass on it. And I would do that until it built up like kind of a corn dog on a stick. And I would carefully tool the ribs in it. And of course, it was really crumbly and tried to fall off, and it required some real finesse. But I got some credible beads. Well, when we had Cedi out for the workshop, I showed him this method. And he pronounced it to be clumsy, which he was absolutely correct. It was clumsy, but it netted results. And he said he thought he could come up with a better approach, which he never did, but that's neither here nor there. But this dear friend of mine, Herb, who is a mechanical engineer and a owner of a medium-sized industry up in Idaho, he employs 100 people up there making big machinery to drill holes in the earth. Herb was inspired by this whole concept, and Herb went home and he, using a water jet machine, which is like a $250,000 machine, made some molds, very sophisticated molds. There's pictures of them in the book. The molds had masks on the top that were metal. They were aluminum molds in the shape of the chevron star. And with the masks, you could dust the powdered glass into the mold and it would only fall into its respective cell. And we would put those molds into a hollow in a soft brick, fill them with the powdered glass, and then using a vibrating tool, put like a hemostat, a little clamp on the aluminum mold, and get the mold to vibrating, and that would cause the powdered glass to not stick to it. And you could slowly raise the aluminum mold out of there, and it would leave all the powder behind in its respective place. One of the absolute criteria for a chevron bead is that it's layered. And if you were to slice that bead, the pattern would be in every slice. And you had mentioned in your questionnaire about fake chevrons. The only fake chevrons are the ones that aren't layered beads. There are chevrons that are not, well made, but if they're layered, whether they're from Italy or from China or from Indonesia or India, they're still technically a chevron. It was a hard learning experience, but people in the West, meaning Europe, America, Western culture, feel the need to help Africans get a leg up because Western cultures, we live modern technological worlds, and we've got, air conditioners or whatever, running water. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing to want to help people. And the chevron is such a highly regarded bead in so many places in Africa. It just occurred to me that it would be an unbelievably wonderful thing to do, to be able to enable the Africans like Cedi and people in his environment there to make real chevrons. Not to build glass furnaces and to have to train up and become hot rod glass blowers and get good lapidary equipment and all that stuff, but to make a credible, real layered chevron bead with the wood-fired furnace technology that they had on hand. And I thought, I could do that. And I did. So,
wow.
This is a chevron that I made with the corn dog method.
Wow.
And
was he able to reproduce that?
Well, Herb developed these aluminum molds because Herb's a machinist. He's a mechanical engineer. And he understands the precision of the chevron and the joy of that precision. He went to Africa with me. Herb made these molds. Look at the difference between this one and the one you just looked at. You see how precise that is?
Yes, yes.
So with Herb's mold, it made as precise a chevron as I can make it in my furnace with the mold technology and the liquid glass. And these molds were tricky, and they took a lot of time for Herb to make and a lot of effort. He's a very generous man. He's a bit of a philanthropist in his own right. So he made these molds, and then we proofed them out. And then we took them to Africa. There were 4 of us that went, Herb and my friend Tom and my daughter Melissa and myself. And we each took a 5-gallon pail of powdered glass as one of our check-ins. Well, this was after 9/11, and like we were checking in some pretty weird stuff there on the belly of the airplane. We had to go through TSA, and Tom left from Boston with his pail. I shipped it to him UPS. Melissa and I left from Reno with ours. Herb left from Idaho with his, and so we ended up, all of us got to Ghana with our 4 or 5-gallon pails of powdered glass and our tools and all that. And we gave a very serious, hardcore chevron making workshop to Cedi and to his brother and his foreman. And we all made chevrons. We probably made 25 or 30 beads while we were there, along with seeing the sights and going to the national park and seeing the wild elephants and stuff. But in the end, Cedi never made chevrons. I left all that behind, the tools and everything. And it just turned out that it's a lot of work, even to make a powdered glass chevron. And the powdered glass beads they make are a lot less work. They're sell at a much lower price point.
Yeah.
And so I kind of was disappointed at the fact that they didn't follow through, but I got over that.
But, maybe that's something they get back to someday,
Well, they may. They actually may. It kind of broke my heart that they didn't follow up, because I actually started a nonprofit. My plan was that we could get together a full glass blowing workshop. I figured I could put it in a 20-foot ocean container, everything to build a glass blowing workshop, bricks, a welder. We could go over there and I could build the furniture for the glass shop with them, and I could teach them fundamental glass blowing techniques and leave these guys with a working hot shop, and they could make tableware out of recycled glass, tumblers and product. Well, that didn't come true, because Herb, who is a businessman and who understands the nature of such things, is that if everybody isn't invested, it's not going to work. So we actually got together and we had a board meeting. Herb even hired a facilitator, but there was zero follow through from the African side.
Yeah.
So if there wasn't going to be any follow through from that side, I wasn't going to push it any farther from my side. So I just let it go by the wayside. And that was kind of a heartbreak. But I was driving out east that following summer, and I heard a presentation on NPR. And it was about a guy who'd made a lot of money in the tech world. He'd invented texting or email or something real fundamental to internet. And he cashed out early on, took his money and left and said, hey, this is good. He went up to Montana and he said, I'm having a life, and he got away with his $50 million or whatever it was. And after a few years, he decided he wanted to give back and he wanted to help out. He formed a team and they went over there to one of the southern countries in Africa, Zimbabwe, and they set up medical clinics. They built 2 or 3 medical clinics, and they trained locals in really fundamental hygienic medical practices so that they could have just really baseline medical clinics, and thought this will be a good thing. This will help their society at a real baseline level. Well, they left them and everything looked like it was going to be good. And they came back a year later. The buildings were empty. Nothing was happening. Broke the guy's heart.
Right.
He left almost in tears, and they were interviewing him, and he said, yeah, I don't know what to think.
Yeah.
So he let a few years go by, and he thought he'd try it again. And so he tried it again, and the same thing happened. So he said, okay, I give up. Another few years went by, and somebody from over there that he had met along the way, they approached him. They got in touch with him in America and said, hey, listen, we saw that, and I didn't identify it at the time. When we went up country to the national park, it was a 400-mile drive, real interesting drive, 400 miles into the total sticks of Ghana. And we came back a different route, and we came back through this town called Adwanamase, which is one of the towns where they make the kente. Over here and tried to do this, and we'd like to try to do this. Well, they became invested.
Yes.
And he said, I will come back a third time. And he did, and it stuck.
That's awesome.
Like you said, well, it proves that whole point is that Herb's deal was that if they're not willing to invest, because we charge Cedi with getting a piece of property, get a quarter acre somewhere where you can, next to your compound where you're already at, where we can have a place to get started, and there was just no follow through. And if they're not going to be invested, it's not going to happen.
Yes. I always find you have to have that buy-in, but you also have to have a champion. There has to be somebody over there. Some people call it a first follower or a champion, but you have to have that first person.
Well, we saw that in Cedi. We thought he'd be the guy, right?
And then you have to have the buy-in from everybody.
He's got to have follow through.
Yes.
Cloth, which is a traditional cloth that's made in Ghana. It's made in narrow strips that are sewn together and real bright colored patterns. There's a picture of some kente in the Africa section of the book. The more famous town for kente is very typical of a lot of third world countries, where when Western people come there, you're besieged. The minute you land, every kid is trying to carry your bag or do something for you, to earn a dime, a nickel, a buck, whatever. You come out of the airport and 15 guys want to carry your bag. She found a town where the town, as a philosophical approach to marketing, decided they were not going to allow that behavior in the town. They were going to make the kente cloth, and they were going to have an office where you could go and you could hire someone. to take you on a tour through the town, and where they make the thread and where they go through where the weavers are. And then you could see the whole steps to the kente process. And then when you went to the shops uptown, the shops would be more Western in approach. They would have their product. It would be at a price. They wouldn't dicker with you. So we went to this town, and it was a neat experience. Well, when we were at that part of the town where the looms were, there was a cement building over about 40 yards away. It was like this cement building. It had a thatched roof, because they use thatched roofs, and they're very effective roofs, actually. They shed the rain really well. But the bottom of the building had cement floor, and it was all these cells with walls about 3 feet high. And they were 8 by 8 cells, maybe 5 of them on a side here and 5 of them on a side there. And we asked about that. What is that over there? There was animals in there. There was goats or something in there. They said, well, some people came here from Germany or somewhere 10 years ago. They thought it'd be nice to make us a building to put our looms in. And they came and they made this concrete building, and it was very nice and everything, but the looms weren't in there. Well, we observed what was going on, and these guys are really social. These looms are next to one another in a row, and they're all bantering back and forth and just, running the shuttles back and forth on the loom. And that concrete environment was antithetical to the social aspect of the way they worked. Yeah. So they just said, well, thanks for the help, but we'll make a goat pen out of it,
Are there other beads you would like to show us? I mean, I know you pulled some out.
I've got beads upon beads if you want to see beads.
Yes, show. We're Meet the Bead here.
Yes, this is Meet the Beads. So let's meet a few beads here. The Zamm beads we mentioned, and you talked about them earlier. They're the beads I made for the millennium. And it occurred to me that I could make a cane that was signed in the cane and dated, which would be the first chevron bead in the 500-year history of the chevron that was signed and dated. And with Roman numerals, I could date it with 2 characters. MM is 2000 in Roman numerals. So I set about and spent a great deal of 1 year prior to 2000 making 20 canes. I don't know if we get this up here.
Yes, I can see that.
Can you see that? It says ASMM.
And I'm going to see if I can pull it up in the book so that I...
Oh, it's that same bead is in the book.
I know.
So that's my initials, AS, and MM for 2000. Well, since it's a chevron cane and those letters come out the other side, when you look at them on the other side, it says ZAMM.
It's crazy. Now, I mean, like the idea for that, like, do you envision that in your head? Or how does
the Zamm part was totally accidental. I mean, it was just happened, I mean, I wanted it to say ASMM. That was fine. Well, one of my rendezvous pals out east, looked at that and it says Zamm. I said, it says ASMM. He says, no, it says Zamm. He says, those are Zamm beads. Well, they became Zamm beads. And I advertised them as Zamm beads in a rendezvous newspaper, and we sold the Zamm beads. I still have Zamm beads to sell. The intent was to make 20 of them, one for each century of the millennium. There would be 20 different ones. And there was 2 that were prototypes. So there was ultimately 22. And I was going to make some box sets to have all of them. Oh. Well, one of the 20 wasn't a very successful cane. It only produced about a dozen beads that had good characters in them. So that limited the number of box sets. But there was gobs and gobs of the Zamm beads, and I still have Zamm beads of many of the colors. And I had, as in the case of this strand, a friend of mine who does this crown knot braiding, braided up. This is one of the box sets. This is all the beads from the from the set. And this orange one here that my little fingers are rolling, that's the one that didn't make enough for there to be any. Now, in the box set, because one of the things I decided early on in my Chevron career was that these beads are part of history. And I've had this discussion, argument, however you want to describe it, for 40 years with various people about new beads versus old beads, you know. And my point has been from day one, and shall be until I draw my last breath, that every old bead was a new bead once. And this bead has a 500-year history, and this is today's page in that history. And in 500 years, these will be old beads, and they'll still be here in 500 years.
Yeah.
Glass lasts. Glass lasts for thousands of years if it's not, you know, kept in a corrosive environment. It's glass and bronze and clay are the most enduring man-made materials out there, as far as they can endure for millennia, even buried. So, considering that the beads I make are historical objects, I felt that I should imbue them with historical context. And since I had made one, I dated them, and I had made 15-layer beads. One of the Zambedes is a 15-layer bead. One of them is a 13-layer bead. And so, and speaking of a 15, there's a...
Is that a 15-layer cane?
That is a 15-layer cane, and it has a hole in it. I could make a bead out of this. I just haven't because... But
That's crazy. Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
I actually can get pretty close and it stays focused.
Yeah, that's amazing, Art.
Now, this cane is the one that I made. This cane while Harlan and Carrie were here making the film. And there's a part of the film where Harlan does some special effects where he's got all these canes spinning around in a created thing, and it's slices of that 15-layer cane.
Okay, what you just said about history and beads, I mean, it made me think, when is the Art Seymour Museum collection coming? Are we going to ever see a Seymour bead museum?
It exists. It's going to be a family-operated museum. I've learned some lessons about museums. I was told by a fellow years ago to be wary of donating to museums. I got stung doing that, and it was a painful lesson. There was a bead museum in Arizona that was founded by Gabrielle Lissay, she was just a beautiful, beautiful lady. And she was absolutely sincere in her desire to have this be an ongoing museum, and she had the federal charter and all of that stuff. But it wasn't self-sustaining. After Gabrielle passed, she was the guiding force. She also provided a lot of the financial input. She started it at a shop she had in Prescott, Arizona, and ultimately it moved down into the Phoenix Basin, into Glendale. It was a pretty nice museum. It had a lot of potential. But it fell by the wayside. It couldn't maintain. There wasn't enough people who beads meant enough to them to keep being the driving force to keep that museum a viable business entity. So it closed its doors, and its collection kind of went to the winds. And a great deal of its collection went to a museum called the Mingay Museum in San Diego. I've never been there.
I always wondered that because I knew there was a museum of beads in Washington, D.C., and then I saw
the Washington, D.C. Bead Society also made a museum. Now, John Picard has a museum, and his museum is very beautiful, and his is an example of a private museum that he built, endowed, and maintains. and I will hope that his family will maintain it, when John's gone.
I always wondered what happened to the beads from that Washington museum.
Well,
I always wondered what
I'm
happened.
unaware of what
Yeah.
came of the ones in the Washington Museum. I donated a lot of beads to Mrs. Lisset. I donated some beads to her that were nicer than the beads I collected myself from my own cane. And when that collection went to the Mingay, it vaporized.
We need to get in touch. If you're out there and you are with the Mingay Museum, we need to contact you.
If I get to San Diego sometime, which travel is getting to be harder and harder with my age, but I will pursue that. But the word is out in the bead community that the Mingay dispersed vast quantities of what was left to them from the Bead Museum in Arizona. And the Mingay had some beads, but it's not a bead museum. It's a museum. And like most museums, 90% of their collection isn't on display.
Right,
Almost
exactly.
all museums, you look at the Met, they probably don't have 3% of their collection on
No,
display.
I know.
Constantly rotating. And that's why this fellow that I met named Henry Corning, who was a wise gentleman, he told me, he says, if you put beads in a museum, put them on loan, and you can get legal loan documents even if they access your beads, that's in a museum, you can give them stuff and they can sell it tomorrow. But if they access it formally, then it becomes part of their collection and it becomes harder for them to dispose of. They can still dispose of it later, but you can loan it to them. And that's why you'll see in a lot of museums on loan from the collection of or from the family of.
Yeah.
And that's because the people who really those objects are the most meaningful to don't want them to be dispersed out into who knows where. I'm really confident that probably most of the beads I donated to the museum in Arizona are in private hands and were bought at yard sale prices.
Yeah.
And it's just a life lesson. I'll get over it, but I wouldn't repeat it. I would only loan beads to a museum going forward.
Okay, show us what else you got on your table there.
Okay, well, I've got so much here on the table here. Well, just as an example, I mentioned that I'm into turquoise, and you asked me if I collected other people's beads, and I do. Now, these are all this is all Tibetan turquoise and coral.
Wow.
That I collected years ago, and it's really a nice strand of.
That is beautiful.
This stuff, I've had that in my possession for, I don't know, 30 years. It's older stuff. Now, there's some beads I have here that we made in Ghana. When we went to Ghana to make chevrons, I took the personal project that I mentioned in the book, and there's pictures of those beads in the book. And actually, these two strands, this one I think is in the book, this strand. And
they're so cool.
Those big beads, those were finished marbles. They were finished swirl marbles, which I hired Cedi's foreman, a man named Quadjo, to take those perfect spherical, beautiful, smooth marbles and heat them up and warp them and distort them and make them into these beads. It broke his heart. It absolutely broke his heart. Because, the marbles were just so pristine. And then these were pretty rough when he was done with them. I brought them back to Nevada and I refinished them and put this satin finish on them. And these beads here, I kept Quadjo busy for about almost 3 weeks. So you can see these beads have chevron genesis.
Wow. They're
You
so
can see
swirly. Oh yeah, there you go. I can see the chevron now in that one.
what I did was for 2 weeks before we left for Ghana, I spent 2 weeks at my diamond saw, and I had all manner of cane, that a lot of it is butt ends, and they're not suitable for making, formal beads, but it's still got all the action in it, and some of it's distorted or whatnot. I cut it all up into little cubes, about 8 to 10 millimeters cubes, some a little smaller, maybe 7 millimeters. And I had a bag this big,
Oh my God.
15 pounds of those cubes of chevron bits and bits from Latticino cane. And I took them to Quadjo and I said, I'd like to have you put these in your clay molds and fuse them in your heat and then stir a hole into them. And these are the beads that he made. And they came out just great. And I was really tickled with the outcome. So this is a piece of cane. This is a kind of a follow-on to the Millennium cane. There was a point in about 2006, which was my 20th anniversary making chevrons, that I decided I was going to make a 20th anniversary cane. And so I would sign in and date it the way I signed the Zamm beads. And I made this cane because at the time I made it, I was making a lot of mosaic cane.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I can see your initials. AS.
So there's my initials and XX, Roman numeral for 20, because that's my 20th anniversary of making chevrons.
My initials are SA. So if you ever screw up and put the S before the A,
there you go.
you'll have a buyer for that cane.
I'll keep that in mind. There you go.
If you ever get a sudden case of dyslexia.
You'd also ask me about shapes.
Well, I asked you about shapes because I've these weird shapes, but then I saw in your book that maybe other people grind them. I don't know if you're grinding unusual shapes.
My personal preference is for more compact, smooth, user-friendly shapes, and also shapes that are mechanically sound. Now, traditional ovoid shapes, I do make a few faceted ones, because they were traditional. The oldest chevrons were faceted; they weren't ground into an ovoid shape like I do. But with modern lapidary machinery out there, and a lot of Italian and then Chinese cane has become available, there's a lot of people out there grinding beads. There's a great amount of creativity just in grinding the bead. So I have some beads here that were ground by a friend of mine. A lot of people who grind unusual or exotic shapes, they grind what I kind of refer to as bedpost grinds.
Oh my gosh. That is very unusual. Oh my God.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
This bead would break into sections readily if it were dropped. It's not mechanically a sound shape. But
dumbbell shaped, I describe that.
Now this is another interesting shape.
Whoa. Oh, it's like grooved out.
Yeah, but the grooves are a little diagonal to the pattern in the cane. Now this is Chinese cane that he ground this with.
I've never seen that.
And this is another one that he ground.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Now, who's doing that kind of grinding?
This is a fellow who is no longer with us. He was, God, I can't think. His rendezvous name was Bear, and that's all I can remember his name as, Bear.
It's okay.
He passed away about 5 years ago. Oh, here's a couple of examples of marbles like that.
Whoa.
That's the kind of marbles that Quadjo turned into those lumpy beads.
But wait, you didn't make that marble.
Oh, I made that marble, yeah.
You did make that marble, okay.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, it looks like something you would make. That's a big marble too.
Now, there's a fellow in Germany. His first name is Uwe, U-W-E, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. Watkne, something, W-A-T-K-N-E, something like that, who's very creative in his shapes. And I've sent some cane to him. This is a real interesting bead that he made.
Wow. Wow. That is so interesting. He's like done more detail on the ends.
Well, that
Wow.
detail's in the core of the bead,
Right,
see?
exactly. Yeah.
Here's another one of Uwe's beads, which is really a far out bead.
Wow. That's so cool. It's amazing. Did you know the potential of
No, I just sent Uwe some cane and said, knock yourself out, buddy. There's another one.
wow. That's amazing. And what's your opinion of that? Do you feel like that really highlights how intricate the cane is made, or
I find them to be quite interesting. They're not grinds I would do, but they're not as radical as like the ones Bear made.
right, right.
I think Uwe's beads have they're more finesse. This is a real interesting one.
Whoa. Oh
Now
my
look, now isn't that now?
goodness.
Uwe doesn't get trapped into a groove. I mean, he's not stuck in making bedposts, you know.
Do you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of when you are slicing a pineapple and you try to get all the little eyes out. You
Oh,
glue them,
okay, yeah,
and then it looks like that before you slice. I would call that the pineapple cut.
sure.
I should give everything a name. I don't know why.
This is another interesting one that he ground.
Whoa, that's very cool. I mean, it really does highlight some hidden potential within the cane, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there is, and I'm not averse, but I don't have any desire to want to really explore the shape of the bead for the shape's sake.
Right, right.
I'm more interested in the glass talking to me. Now, one of the shapes that I've been leaning toward in the last several years is bicone shapes, and I
Hmm.
like the way the bicones.
Now this is your grinding.
Yeah, this is a
Wow,
grind I did on a compound cane.
very cool.
Now, these compound cane beads, the compound cane beads I made is a personal challenge. They've made beads with fused canes like this in Italy, and they typically, in fact, I've never seen any that were done like this. They will take 5 or 6 canes or 7, and they'll roll them up off the pastorelli and fuse them and keep the hole where they would roll them up. But the canes get all distorted because they're round, and to get fused, well, they get all distorted, and so the pattern isn't crisp. And I saw someone on one of the bead forums showing one of those beads off, and I looked at that bead and I said, you know, that could be done properly, I said to myself. There's a story in the book about Al Lynn, the Oregon bead man. There's 4 pages in the book devoted to him. He was just a charming old man, and we became dear friends. And Al, he sold beads for 30 years, 35 years, and he started selling beads when he was like 50. And I met him at Rendezvous, and we became instant friends. And his favorite bead was the green chevron. And once I met him, we always would camp together if we could, as close as possible at Rendezvous, because we'd hang out. Al was, 75 when I was like 45. And so he was a lot older, but he was just a charming little old man. He was about 5'6", had snow white hair, and spoke with a little squeaky voice like this. And anyway, Al lived to be 90, and I went up to his 90th birthday party, and he was kind of into dementia at that point. And his son told me that he probably wouldn't recognize me when we went up to his party. He lived up in Southern Oregon. But I took him a golf ball size green chevron. And he was sitting in the chair kind of holding court. It was his birthday party, and he was the grandpa and the great grandpa and all these people around it. And I walked up and I says, "Hi, Al." I says, "I brought you a present." And he looked at that bead and he recognized me immediately. He says, "Hi, well, hi, Art. How are you doing? Wow, thanks for the nice bead,
Aw.
So he passed about 4 months later. And his son, John, called me and told me that he'd passed. And I said, "Well, John," I says, "you bring his ashes over to my shop and we'll put Al in some glass and we'll make beads with Al in them." And there's a page about that whole story in the book. And John and I worked for about a week and a half, and we made a big pile of beads, chevron beads and latticino beads and a few other miscellaneous objects that all had Al's ashes in the glass. And what I did was, for Al's beads, I put a good portion of Al's ash, like about a cup of ash, into a 40-pound pot of white glass and melted it right in with the glass. So any of the white glass that's in the beads we made with Al, the white glass has Al's ashes in it. Well, we got done, and there's chevrons. I made green chevrons because that was his favorite bead. And then we made other kinds of beads as well. And all these beads have Al Lynn's ashes in them.
So even the chevrons, can you see the ashes in the chevrons?
You can't see it, but the white glass that's in the chevron, that's the white in the pattern, has Al's ashes in it. Any of the white glass in any of these beads has Al's been. The sweet part of the story was when John gathered his stuff all up, because, we pulled the cane for days, and then we both were grinding, and Al left, I don't know how many kids, he had like 6 or 7 kids, and then beaucoup grandkids and even some great grandkids. Well, the closer to Al they were in the generational line, they got like a string of beads. And then the farther they got out, the great grandkids got, a few beads on a string. But everybody in Al's line ended up with beads, and there was beads left for me.
Aww.
And I took Al out into the world because a lot of people knew Al. And I mean, he was really well known on the West Coast. He was the Oregon bead man, and he was charming as could be. I sent beads all over the world with Al. I know for sure he's on every continent but Antarctica, and he might be on Antarctica by now.
I have a friend who goes frequently. We can get him to Antarctica if you want him on Antarctica.
Really? Hey, I will work with you on that. I would like to know that he's in Antarctica, and your friend's going to have to be willing to let go of the bead.
Yeah.
He's going to have to be willing to take it there and drop it down a crevasse or something. I just want it to go into the mist in Antarctica. I've sent beads all over the world to just go into the mist. I throw them in creeks, and it's just a thing.
Aww.
I've rolled them in gopher holes on Cahokia Mound in Illinois, and the giant Monk's Mound on Cahokia. Well, they're part of history, and I'm putting them out into the geology. I've hidden them in the arms of cactuses that won't die for 100 years, and then when they fall over, it might be another 100 years before that cactus disintegrates enough where the bead falls out.
I love that.
I like the idea of someone just stumbling upon the bead and having no context with me or beads or anything, and just being charmed by that groovy piece of glass.
I said, if there's a meteor that hits the earth tomorrow and all the people in Alaska die, they're going to think there was a bead store on my property because I have so many.
Exactly. Right. Well, Yeah, I've had friends when they travel, I send beads, to just hand a bead to a stranger. That's a good thing to do. John says as he's getting ready to get into his truck, he says, I think it was 40 years he told me his dad had been selling beads. He says, for 40 years, my dad worked the bead trade from the outside. Now he's working it from the inside.
Oh.
So here's some interesting beads.
Ooh, they're so colorful. I am a colorist in the oil painting world. I am what they call a colorist. Like I see color more vibrant.
I like your paintings. I like your impressionist style, and I like your vigorous use of color. I like your palette knife work. No, for serious. Yeah. Well, the first of these beads I made, which I call carousel beads because they kind of look like a carousel.
Yes, they do.
Well, I made them when Cedi was here because I have to have an assistant to make them. Somebody has to mind the pipe while I go get the color to drop into the groove in the glass for the different stripes. Well, when I had Cedi here for the first workshop, I had him sit at the chair and mind the pipe, and then I would over my shoulder say, okay, go heat it in the glory hole and I'd say, now go back to the chair, and I'd keep track of him and talk him through it while I was preparing my part. Well, the Ghana flag beads were started on a carousel bead, and it seemed appropriate to me because I would have never made the carousel beads if I didn't have some Cedi there to be the minder. So anyway, I made these canes, and I really like the way the little the disc beads came out.
Those are so beautiful.
And
Wow, look from the end.
disc beads pass light through them. I don't know if
Yes.
you can see how they're transparent.
Yes. Is that what got you into making disc beads? I mean, or was that the bead that got you into making disc beads?
Well, I had made rondelles for years with stone. Yes.
I
Now
think that's one of yours,
that's a
right?
luscious bead right there. Yes, I tell people that's better than television. Absolutely. You hold that up to the light and look through it. You can look through that for a long time and still see new stuff.
I know,
That
it's so
that
cool.
that exemplifies to me in one of the best ways the transparent qualities and the color qualities of glass that so inspired me with this paperweight.
Yes.
It's water clear, but with color. And then when you mix the colors together, like in that disc, you just get outrageous effects.
Mhm, mhm.
Well, I made a series of disc beads that were rondelles like this.
Whoa. Wow, those are so pretty. Oh my gosh, so pretty.
And see, this is a traditional shape to make stone beads. And I made a lot of rondelle turquoise beads. I probably made 100 strands of turquoise beads.
Whoa.
And I had a collector friend years ago. I had made some little round cross drilled beads, and he had a strand that got either stolen or misplaced at a rendezvous, and he was heartbroken. And he asked me if I'd make him another strand. And it's a lot of work to do all this drilling. Drilling in glass is decidedly tedious work. You have to really want to do it. And all these beads were drilled. Well, I finally agreed to replace Jim's strand, and I got my drilling station all set up and started drilling beads one winter, and I ended up drilling beads for 5 months.
My
And I made his strand, and I was drilling some other beads, and then I made some beads with shards. John's book has some shard beads that typically the shard beads you see from chevrons from Africa are made with shards from old 7-layers. And when the bead gets broken, the bead is so valuable, they won't dispose of the parts. They'll take the part and they'll drill a hole through it and they'll make a bead, a pendant bead, or make a bead out of that part of a chevron.
Wow.
And I had a rendezvous friend who had a African shard chevron, which I collect odd chevrons, from history. Don't have a giant collection, a couple of dozen beads, but I wanted a shard bead. And I had told my friend that whenever he was ready to part with that bead, I would be happy to be the guy who traded it out of him or bought it from him. Well, one day he comes up and he says, okay, I'm ready to part with the bead. What did he give me? I says, I forget what I gave him. I says, I'll give you $100 in trade off of my table or whatever, something like that. He says, okay, I'll do that. I says, well, pick whatever you want. Everything's priced. So the next year he said, well, where's your shard beads? Because he was sure I was going to go home and make some shard beads. Well, I didn't. I got the bead. I was happy. Well, I had a bead sitting on my table that was a bead that I would pick up and talk to people with as, a show and tell and demonstration bead. And I was in a tent at a rendezvous. And of course, you have to have a hammer to hammer your stakes in. And I had this little small sledgehammer that was my stake hammer. It was laying on the floor, and this bead rolled off the table and hit the hammer and broke into 3 pieces. While I'm standing there talking to him, and he's asking me where my shard beads are, I said, this is providential. So I pick up the 3 pieces. I says, here, you take 1, I'll take 2. We'll both make a bead out of what we've got, and we'll compare them next year. Well, I went home and I made beads out of those 2, and I got terribly inspired. And so I made shard beads for a couple of months that winter.
Wait, did you break
I
whole
broke
bead?
pieces of cane with a hammer, so they would be random shards. I cut slices with the diamond saw. I cut cane in odd angles. And one of the most fun things that I derived was I took a piece of cane and, say if it was like a cylinder, like a dog food can, and cut it lengthways so that it was 2 half cylinders. And then I drilled those half cylinders. And then using that hole as an axis, I made a rondelle out of that bead. And that's what this strand of beads is.
Wow. That's awesome. That is so cool. So that's how that pattern comes out.
That's how that pattern comes out. You're looking down half of the end of the cane. And I made probably 15 strands like this over a span of several years.
That's amazing.
And I probably still have 6 of them.
That's awesome.
Just for fun, I'd like to do a little silver work on the side now and then. These beads here are made with mercury dimes.
Mercury dimes? You mean like old dimes?
Like old dimes that had mercury on the face, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
There's 2 mercury. There's not mercury metal in there. Mercury is a historical figure, Mercury with the wings on their feet. And one of the dimes that was used up until 1940 or 42 had the head of Mercury on the face of it. And then the Roosevelt dimes came after the Mercury dimes in American coinage. So you'd also ask me about what some of my favorite beads are that I make.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for me to have favorite beads because I just love them all so much.
Yeah. They're like children, I'm sure.
But some of the most complicated beads, probably the most physically complicated beads that I make, are the fusion beads. And they're called fusion because their different parts are fused together. So this is a fusion bead.
Whoa.
Now that's two separate pieces of chevron cane on the end, and it's also,
Wow.
you see the center is a crystal jazz bead. So what
Oh.
I had to do is I had to make the crystal jazz bead as a freestanding bead, and then I had to cut the ends off of it with a diamond saw, and I had to take the chevron cane and make it largely into a finished bead, cut it in half, and grind the parts until they fit one another, and then mount them together on a mandrel and get them hot and fuse them together without distorting the patterns. When you get them hot enough, liquid hot, and not distorting the patterns, pretty tricky.
And did you know that was going to work, or is this like all experimentation? And was there like a whole pile that didn't work?
Well, I'll tell you how the fusion process came to me in a waking dream vision. I was in my shop up at the ranch, and I had a bunch of heavy metal jazz beads in the annealer. The base canes were warming up in the annealer, and I was going to go out there and torch the jazz elements on them with the silver underlay and everything. And I was walking down this hallway in the shop in the morning, and I was about an hour from getting ready to go out there and do the hot work. And like way up here, I'm walking along looking ahead, but somewhere up here, out of my visual vision, but in my mental visual space up here, I saw this fusion bead. Now, it was not an extreme fusion bead like this one that had like a crystal jazz bead, which is a whole radical bead. It was beads that were made with several pieces of just straight cane. And I saw this image in my mind's eye, which, like I say, was up here. It wasn't here where my eyeball's eyes were. And my mind said, that's impossible. And I was in stride. I was walking. And by the time I took another step, this sort of book went bip, 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 bip in that same mental space. And I saw step by step how to make that fusion bead. And without breaking stride, I continued walking out into the other room where I had that oven on. I turned the oven off. I says, I'm not making these heavy metal jazz beads today. And I went in my grinding room and I got some cane and I got a diamond saw working, and I made parts to make those first two fusion beads. And I worked on those parts until about, I don't know, 8 or 9 at night. And then I put them in an oven and I got them hot. And about midnight, they were hot enough I could take them out of the oven. And I fused them. And at 2 a.m., I had them back in the oven. And I went out and I got into my hot tub because the ranch has a hot spring on it. So we have a running hot water 24/7 up there.
Nice.
And I went to bed like 3 a.m., got up late, and the next day by the afternoon, I had finished fusion beads. The first one worked.
Wow.
And it was totally a vision thing.
Yes.
And I've made a lot of fusion beads since, and I've had multiple design series that evolved from that premise. And the ones that I brought to show you here, are some of my most favorite. You asked me about some of my most favorite beads because they're so utterly complex. And you can actually see the transparency of the crystal jazz.
Yep. And then it's opaque at the ends where the chevron.
And in this particular case for this one, I took it to even a further extreme. I did on a handful of these beads, which was really obscene, is I polished the hole, which was a whole lot of work. It was a whole lot of work.
It's like magic. That bead is like magic, isn't it? It looks like a
A
magic
lot of
trick.
these beads are like magic. They really
Yes.
are. In fact, that's a line that I tell people. This is when I made my 20th anniversary bead. that I made
Whoa.
that cane I showed you. I made like a dozen of them with Chevron cane.
And then there's the mosaic in the middle. That's crazy.
That's the same piece of cane with the
Wow.
AS and the XX on it.
And it's so that one really demonstrates how precise and what a perfectionist you are, because all those it's just so well aligned, nothing is smudged or smeared. That's amazing.
Well, these guys here, I mean, now these are beads that are from my collection.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful.
You can see the transparent quality of the center.
Yes, you can. That is so spectacular. That's awesome.
This is another one that's really nice. This was one of my more favorite ones.
Wow. It's got like the yellow stars or crosses.
Got little amber stars in there, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. And then what color do you call that on the ends? Like a
Oh, it's a
fuchsia,
lavender.
lavender.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more lavender than fuchsia. It's less pink. Now, this is that same cane that was just in a pure crystal jazz bead.
Ooh, that is so beautiful. Is that in your book? I don't remember seeing that. That is
Yeah,
so
well, there's one page that's got 2 crystal jazz beads in the
okay.
book. This
So
might be
that's
one of
called a crystal jazz bead. That's what
I call it
that's
a
it.
crystal jazz. There's no chevron genesis in this bead. There's no chevron genesis whatsoever. It's lapidary finished, but there's no pattern made cane like a chevron, and it's on a clear base. It's literally on a clear core. So,
So you're more than just a chevron maker. You're a bead, you're a glass
well, you
mister.
asked me in there if I stopped making beads, what would I do? And I answered that question at the beginning of our talk here, and it's like, I'm a glass maker who makes beads. I'm a bead maker too, but I was a glass maker first, and I'll still be a glass maker second. Like, these
Oh,
cane bases, which
wow, that's beautiful.
this is the series that I'm working on right now to make this fall when my knee gets healed up. Yeah, I'm going to show you the temple stones too. Yeah, if you want to see some temple stones, they're the beads. They're fusion beads, but they're the beads that have spoken to me the most intensely of all the beads I've made, and they likewise are not chevron genesis. They're a fusion bead. They're canes that don't have chevrons in them or chevron patterns. See if we can get this.
Whoa. Whoa. And they're like square rods or square. Wow. That is crazy.
To make these beads, there's a lot of preparation in these beads. They start out as square canes that are drilled. They're cut into lengths a little bit longer than the cross section. They're drilled crossways.
Oh my gosh. That's
Trying to
amazing.
see.
Wow.
These are very difficult. In fact, Robert Lew
Yeah.
pronounced these beads the hardest beads he'd ever tried to photograph.
That's amazing. Wow.
Well, when I start making a new series of beads, I usually don't have an idea what I'm going to make. I'm just, I say, oh, I'm going to make some jazz beats. And so I go out there and I make something similar to what I've been working on in the past. I say, okay, I'll decorate this bead like that. But that bead will talk to me. And it'll say, well, if I did it this way, it'll look a little different. I'll try that. And I'll do it that way. And then the next day I'll go, what if I'd have gone like that? And by the time 3 days has gone by, I'm making a whole bead I never made before. And it wasn't like just a design. It just evolved out of my head in the course of, I do the same thing on the blowpipe when I'm making vases. I don't go out there saying I'm going to make this kind of vase for 2 weeks or whatever. Well, these temple stones, I set about making some jazz beads, and I says, okay, I'm going to make a fusion bead out of this. Well, when I make the fusion beads, they end up cylindrical like that, but then I typically will grind them into, another shape, like say a long bicone, or maybe an ovoid shape like this one here is.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So that's one of the temple beads.
Well, this is not technically, but sort of.
Okay.
The ones that really they're more like all of the more cylindrical and really close to cylindrical.
Okay.
This one would qualify. What they are is they're votive objects. I'm trying to, let's see here. I'm going to turn this down here and see if I can you see that there setting there?
Not yet. No, not yet. Keep going down. I don't see it. Okay, now I can see it. Yep, now I can see it.
So you see how it stands up there like that?
Yes. Okay.
Well,
Aha.
so when I made them, the first couple of them, because this bead takes 3 days of preparation before it can be fused. The parts, each I make parts for about 3 beads at a time. I call it the pipeline, and then I run those 3 beads through the next series of steps, and when they come out the pipeline on the 4th day, well, then they're ready to be ground and polished.
Right.
So there's more days yet, to finish the lapidary work. But I got really immersed in making these things, and they were made as votive objects. I mean, they can be a bead, they have a hole, but they're like a votive object, like a meditation object. And I was sitting here in my chair thinking, and I would work for like 10, 12 hours a day working on grinding and polishing and drilling, because all the drilling and the grinding is really kind of bizarre, because you're taking a square thing and you're grinding it cylindrical, the wrong direction. And after I'd been going about 2 weeks, there was 10 or 12 beads that were finished. And so I worked on those temple stones for 5 months. And 2 to 3 weeks in, I would finish up some beads. Each day, I would work on several beads at each step of the process, but each day, a few beads would come out of the pipeline at the far end. Sometimes it'd be a couple of days wait. And I'd come and I'd sit down and I'd eat and I'd think about life, and I'd go over there and admire my work and look at it and let it talk to me and think about it. And I thought, well, out of the blue in my head, this term temple stone. Now, they're not made out of stone, they're made out of glass, but I started calling them temple stones. And in my mind, I didn't write it down or anything. I just said, okay. So I go over and I look at them, and there's like 15 of them are sitting on a row, and I'm looking at them. Okay. And I come and sit down, and I'm reading a book, and this voice in my head says, Wu Tai. I don't know from Wu Tai. It's just sitting here, and it was a male voice, and it was not real deep like James Earl Jones, but it wasn't real, high pitched. And I thought, I'm reading this book. Voice comes back. It's more insistent. It says, Wu Tai. I said, what? You know? I go back to my reading. I'm not used to being disturbed. I live alone with a dog, you know? And the voice comes back and it's almost yellow. It says, Wu Tai. I said, enough with this. I go get on the computer, you know? I go to Dr. Google. I type in Wu Tai, how I figure it should be spelled, Wutai. Wu Tai is a mountain in China and is one of the 4 tallest peaks, I think, in one of the 4 quarters of China, the northeast quarter or something. And it's a mountain known for temples. And they're some of the oldest wooden temples in China in Wu Tai. And I'd called these temple stones, and this voice is screaming at me, Wu Tai. So they're Wu Tai temple stones, but
Wow.
I just refer to them as Wu Tai. But no, it still gives me goosebumps when I think about that night, because I haven't had that experience before or since.
Right.
Where,
That's an
you know,
amazing story.
something. I've had plenty of visions, but not like that.
So this segment of the show is called the Bead Jar.
Oh, the Bead Jar.
I've set aside certain beads for us to talk about.
Okay.
Is this an Art Seymour bead?
Oh, absolutely.
Is this a jazz bead? Would you call this a jazz bead?
Well, yeah, I consider them, if they're embellished on the surface, they're a jazz bead, and that looks like a snake bead. Yeah.
Okay, a snake bead. Okay, cool.
But it's transparent. It would be like a crystal snake bead.
Awesome. Okay. I got that for my husband. All right. Is this No, I honestly
That looks like it could well be one of my beads and be an older bead.
I think it is one of your older ones too.
No, is it like dark brown?
It is. To me, it's almost like yeah, on the outside it looks dark brown. Like here, whoops, here it looks dark brown, but here it looks more black.
Well, yeah, it's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that bead would have been from the 1980s. That's an old bead. Real old. I didn't even grind it that far.
All right. Is this an Art Seymour bead?
No, that's a Chinese bead.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, one of the things that I as a pretty much a routine, exceedingly rarely did I ever put white in the core of my bead.
Oh, interesting.
So the white core of that bead is a sure giveaway, but that's a cane that the Chinese made, a lot of canes of that color. It's a nice cane.
Yeah, it's kind of, it has so many points on it. It's like kind of crazy.
They make optic molds with 20 points, 24 points, 16. I use a 16-point mold a lot.
Wow.
12-point is the traditional mold from the oldest Italian chevrons. Although the tiny chevrons that come out of Peru that are 7 layers and are faceted, we're talking the size of a garden pea down to the size of a large grain of rice. And they were brought to Peru, reliably dated with Pizarro in 1526. They're 7-layer green cores, just like the big ones, but miniatures.
Oh, interesting. I've never seen any of those beads. Never come across those beads.
Well, they show up. More of them are showing up. You'll see them on the bead forums.
Okay.
Some guys from South America.
Okay.
Like to show.
We already talked about this. Oops, the disc. The disc was in my bead jar. We talked about that one.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Then this one I got. I just had to show you this bead. I got this in Italy.
That looks like something that Mario did for Luigi.
And then look at that. Do you see that Chinaman on there? It's like a Chinaman, and that's why I had to buy it. Because to me,
the little face, I can see that, yeah.
I thought, who else in the world is going to want a Chinese man on their chevron? Sammy Alley, that's you. But I thought
Yeah,
that was a crazy bead. And then last but not least, I got an Art Seymour candy cane.
those are rare anymore. I made a whole bunch of them about 30 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, there's not very many of them left. I mean, in my possession.
Oh,
They went out a
sweet.
long time ago. That's a pretty nice one too.
I know. That's why when you showed that marble, I was like, I think you made that because it reminds me of this. This is beautiful. And so yeah, love
Wow,
that.
that's
Thank
nice.
you.
I'm glad you have it.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I feel like I'm just a keeper of things for this
Well,
generation.
in real life, we're just custodians of all this stuff. I
Yes.
mean, we're not going to last that long. I mean, 100 years is a long life for a human, and that's a short life for a piece of glass.
Yes. I forgot that I'm wearing my Chevron bracelets. Most of these are not your beads, but I just thought I would show them to you for show and tell.
Nice.
But this one is
Oh,
this
that's one
one.
of mine for sure.
Yes, exactly.
That cane was
Yeah.
pulled around 1995, 96. I pulled that in Michael's shop.
I wear these all the
And that
time.
little orange, yeah, that's an experimental color, that orange. I melted that in the around 1990.
Wow, it's so pretty. And then these I got from Mr. Picard. His these are Chinese lightning little round art. Ready? All right.
Okay.
Do
A
you have
light
a favorite line of beads? Crystal
I
jazz, twisted,
the temple stones are the beads that spoke to me the loudest.
temple stones. Okay. Favorite color to use of
All of
glass? All of them. But what if you could only use one color forever and ever?
them. I don't know. Probably blue. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm obsessed with color. Hence the title of the book. Uh,
Color paint would you want? Exactly. It's hard. Okay. Rock and roll or jazz music?
I blues. Blues blues embodies a lot of both of those. I love classic jazz and rock. I think jazz over rock and roll if I had to just be one or the other.
Did you play music in your art studio, in your hot shop when you were making
I do.
beads?
Oh, I listen to music when I'm working. Yeah, I do.
Mostly jazz.
No, jazz, bluegrass. I like bluegrass. I love bluegrass. And jazz, some rock. I have a huge library of music, but I like bluegrass. It's got a nice the rhythm to it.
Is that what you're listening?
Classic, classic like John Coltrane kind of stuff, or Miles Davis. I love Miles Davis.
What are you
Yeah.
listening to now? Are you listening to mostly bluegrass now or
If I'm out in the hot shop on the blowpipe, yeah, I like a fast-paced music
yeah.
because it's kind of a dance on the blowpipe. And I actually find myself actually dancing. Like my feet, I'm at the glory hole and my feet are like doing their thing, separate from me at the glory hole.
Okay, favorite gemstone?
I would have to be a ruby.
Ruby. Why is that? The
I don't know, I
color?
just like them. I mean, it's my birthstone, but I don't think that's why I like them. I like the depth of rubies. Uh,
Nice. All right. And I think that's it. I think that's all I've got for you today, Art Seymour.
well, let me look and see if there's one last small thing that I didn't break out for
Yeah.
show and tell.
Yeah.
Oh, the party in a bead. I'll show you the party in a bead here.
Oh,
I showed you some that were similar, but this one was from the last series of jazz beads I made, and there's an example of this in the book. But yeah.
oh my gosh. A party
Now
bead.
that's a party in one bead. There's a whole party in that bead.
That is so beautiful. It is so meticulously perfected, like alignment. Your alignment is amazing.
Well, you're bound to get a little better at it if you keep practicing. That's
What does
my
the
theory.
future hold
My
for?
theory is if you do enough of anything, some of it's bound to turn out good.
What is the future of the chevron art? Like, are you the last American chevron, like old school Italian
Ralph
school?
and Mary, and you should visit their site, Hair and
Okay.
Glass. They have 120 beads on that site.
Yes.
Now they focus primarily on a variety of different kinds of art glass, but their beads are very, very precise, very meticulously made. American chevron makers. A guy named Kevin O'Grady who works in borosilicate and makes bracelets has made chevron beads off and on for years, not in any great quantity. He just feels challenged to want to make a bracelet or a chevron bead in the torch. The colors that he works with, I don't know, they don't rock my boat, and there's a handful of studio guys who've made a bead or two, I know, but as far as somebody who's just like devoted themselves at a level I devoted myself to the chevron and its analogs. I mean, when you get past the jazz beads, there's still chevrons in their core, most of them.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's going to take somebody with a lot of madness in their heart to.
Wait, I forgot.
Like I said, I don't do anything anybody else couldn't do, but
When is the last time you did an interview?
probably that film.
That's what I was thinking too. I'm like, man, I feel so
That would have
lucky.
been like 2006, 20 years ago. Like a formal interview like this. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
I warned you that, I can't talk about glass enough. It's my life. So,
Well, I could probably talk to you for another 6 hours.
well, perhaps one day we'll meet and we can just have a nice long conversation in person.
Well, thank you so much, Art Seymour. I cannot
thank you for
thank you
having
enough.
me.
I'm so grateful to you. And
Well,
anything else?
it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to getting the link. So, because I told my kids that I'd get them the link to it.
Yes.
I don't know anything about podcasts.
And everybody should go buy Colors of Obsession on your Etsy site.
It's available on Etsy, and I have them also here.
Colors of Obsession. And this is, I think everybody in my life's going to get a copy for Christmas because it's just an amazing story, and it's an amazing photo book.
Master bead.
Master bead. I love
Good old
it.
Jack Grimm. He was a great guy.
Anyways, well, have a good day. Thank you so much.
All right, and you too.
Okay,
We'll
bye.
talk again. Bye.
Okay.